Nice. So hi, I'm Filip. I am a bit out of, I've traveled a bit out of my expertise. I studied philosophy and sociology of culture, but I was a debater all my life. I won the European Universities Championships. I've been top speaker at Worlds, and now I work with startups. I work at Houwen, which is essentially a startup school. So what we do is we take startups in and we give them all the knowledge that they need in order to start their own business. Usually that means taking them through what we call, or what Steve Blank has called, the customer discovery process, because oftentimes startups will start working on their own idea without ever testing if consumers actually want something like this. So I'm here because we ran a program called LuxCloud, which I guess I'll talk a bit in a moment, but essentially I specialize in public speaking and pitching. I coach these startups, and I am a hacker as well. I think that should be enough.
Thanks, Filip. And representing a new young generation of entrepreneurs, of course, which in our cloud industry we certainly have a lot of. It's quite. We like to make jokes, the older generation amongst us, about people being born or conceived after the internet. So can I move next to Marcel and ask you to make an introduction? Sorry, Marco Houwen is CEO of LuxCloud.
Yeah, so my name is Marco Houwen. I'm the CEO and founder of LuxCloud. Myself, I am a little bit of a serial entrepreneur since 13 years now, brought up the first businesses around the internet in 2000. Since three years now, I am absolutely thrilled about this business model I am developing together with my team called LuxCloud, which I maybe will present a little bit in deep later. So.
Okay, thank you, Marco. Matthieu, can I ask you to say something, because Antonio will come last and he has one or two slides to run through.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthieu Hug. I'm founder and CEO of Run My Process, which is a cloud curation platform. So basically, it's a platform that changes the way enterprise build, integrate, and deploy application for their end users. And actually, we were last year we were lucky enough to be to get the prize for best cloud solution by EuroCloud.
And Antonio.
Hello, my name is Antonio Ferreira. I am a computer science engineer. I studied in France, although I am Portuguese. And I started my first company, my first internet company 18 years ago. It was an internet access provider. And I will talk a little bit more about that later.
Right. So what we're going to do now is bring the slides up on the screen, and you'll be able to see them on here once they're up. So what we're talking about in today's session is really about looking at the experience of entrepreneurs, cloud entrepreneurs in Europe. I mean, we often talk about entrepreneurship in the context of cloud, but very often we hear from US entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I think is important when we get together as EuroCloud is to get a more European perspective. So what we want to do in this session is to look at some of the obstacles and challenges that, as well as, of course, the opportunities and growth strategies that entrepreneurs deal with in the European cloud market. So, Antonio, I see your slides are up now, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. To be honest with all of you, when I planned my session, I had 21 slides, and then Filip told me that I had 2 minutes to present, so I cut it down to 10 slides. But I think I won't show you more than 2, so don't worry. Speaking about myself is always difficult, so I tried to summarize in a graph what I've done over the last 18 years. So I've got here 5 companies that I started, some in the tech space and some others in the non-tech space, health in this case. And also to pinpoint what I think were the most successful companies or were a failure, because failure is also part of entrepreneurship. The only two active companies I'm involved with are number 4 and number 5. So I started my first internet company, an internet access provider, 18 years ago. It was a big success, so a good start. And then I stayed on the tech sector and started another company that a year later was closed. Then I went to the non-tech space with a retail business that has grown up to 6 stores selling design furniture for kids, a very niche market, especially in Portugal. And then moved on to plastic surgery as my first company, which is a still active company. Excuse me, ladies in the room, but I've got a very good excuse. That's what I tell to my wife. I've got a very good excuse to see naked women on the internet because it's all about plastic surgery. But forgetting that, what I'm really fond about is entrepreneurship and internet and the cloud. So my newest company, which was launched about a year ago, we started development, but we're only public since about 4 months. It's Lunacloud, which is with number 5. So in terms of the dimension of the circles, that's what the potential I see in each of the companies. So I'm actively involved now with Lunacloud. Let me just go through to the last email. I will spare you all of this. One of the things that okay. This is one of the main messages of my slide deck, which is I currently see myself in a point in the adoption curve of the cloud. Like 18 years ago, we were in the internet access business. If you remember well, the internet access market only really started at a fast pace in 97, 98, 96, 98. And then everyone started getting access to the internet, and by 2000, almost everyone in the developed markets had access to the internet, be it at home or in university. I believe that in terms of the cloud adoption, IaaS, PaaS or SaaS, but the cloud model adoption, we are exactly at the same point we were in the internet access market 18 years ago. So we all know there is a big potential. We all have heard about the cloud. We all have businesses in the cloud. We all have different business models and different strategies, but I believe we haven't seen the potential of the market yet. Many analysts speak about 2014 and 2015 as being, as the market reaching a very high point and the higher speed of adoption. I also believe that, and it's maybe not even 2014 and 2015. I believe we will see high growth in the cloud industry in all areas in the next few years. That's why I'm as excited now in launching a cloud business as I was in launching an internet business 18 years ago. And that's all.
Okay, thanks, Antonio. So I mean, you painted a great picture there, Antonio, of the opportunity. We seem to be right at the start of it. And you look around at the cloud industry, a lot of the big companies that we see today are US companies. I often hear Europeans being accused of being less entrepreneurial than Americans, and I wonder, is there any truth in that, or is it a slightly different definition in Europe, or what's going on here?
Actually, I believe it is true. I think in Europe we have in general an ingrained culture of low risk because of the labor markets or because of the cultural differences or the security that the government and the states bring to all citizens. I believe that we haven't been very entrepreneurial over the last decades or years. But I also believe that is changing. So I think we need to, Europe is bringing a new breed of entrepreneurs. And I believe that one of the strengths that we have is that an entrepreneur in Europe will, first of all, he has or she has different markets to tackle with. So Europe is a collection of many countries with cultural differences, now with almost one single currency, or 2 or 3 big currencies, and one entrepreneur that is successful in Europe has very high chances of being successful elsewhere. What I think we need to change is for European entrepreneurs to see the opportunities in Europe in general and not limited to the boundaries of their own home countries.
Filip, you come from a young generation. Do you have a different perspective, or would you agree that we are perhaps less entrepreneurial here than people in America?
I'm not sure if I would completely agree. I mean, speaking as a sociologist, that kind of a question to me is just a bit wrong. Like, it cannot necessarily be asked. Because I think the concept of what an entrepreneur is differs a lot from depending on where you live. So if you're in Europe, if you're a European person, being an entrepreneur means an absolutely different thing to you than if you come from the States or, for instance, a country like Qatar or even India. So that's the first thing. But secondly, I think that we mustn't forget that Europe is still the world's biggest economy. And thirdly, I think the part where we heard that the European market is fragmented because of different cultures, I think that's very much true. Because what we see, at least what I see working with startups, is that sometimes, unfortunately, it just makes more sense for them to launch their products in the States because they get access to a huge market where they have a huge consumer market, where they have an exit market, where they have a capital market. Like 90% of all venture capital is located on one single street in Silicon Valley. So in that sense, it is much harder to become a large-scale entrepreneur in the sense that, for instance, Mark Zuckerberg is in Europe than it is in the States. But I think that seeing that and the fact that we don't have any big, huge rock stars in Europe yet doesn't necessarily mean that we're less entrepreneurial. For instance, there's a lot more social entrepreneurship in Europe going on than it is in the States. There's a ton of projects that are doing social good, operating at almost zero margin, at almost a zero profit margin. But those things aren't talked about because they're just not that interesting for the media or for the corporate world.
Yes, TechCrunch is not the only arbiter of success, even in the cloud. Matthieu, I know that you also target the US market as well as the European market. So do you see these differences? Are we at a disadvantage in Europe?
I never believe in remarks that speak about Americans or Europeans or people as a group. So I clearly do not believe for a second that people in Europe are less entrepreneurial than in the US. Then it's a matter of fact that there is less success, especially in the IT world in Europe, than what we can witness in the US. But I think the reason is rather different. I just have a question for the room. How many VCs are in the room? How many investors? How many people are ready, like by the end of tomorrow, to start a large-scale project with any of our 3 startups? Okay. If we were in the US, if we were in the Silicon Valley, the room would be full. There would be about 25–30% of the room which would be made of investors or VCs, and probably 1/3 of the room which would be made of large companies which would be interested to work with a startup, to launch a proof of concept with a startup. The problem, I think, in entrepreneurship in Europe and in entrepreneurship success in Europe is not really with entrepreneurs. They do exist everywhere because that's something that can be in the root of humans in absolutely any country. But the ecosystem doesn't exist. There is no exit options for a startup or no clear exit option for a startup within Europe. You don't have large-scale IT vendor in Europe that is able to consolidate the market, or very few of them. There's almost no IPO market for a startup. This has the consequence that there is very few investors, and that the investors don't really believe that you can do a huge success. When you go to an event like that in the US and you have a startup that presents itself, you can see someone who hasn't launched its product yet, who would say, my company is going to make $1 billion in 5 years. If you go anywhere in Europe and you say that, nobody believes you. And I think that's really the root of why you don't see emerging entrepreneurs with huge success in Europe, rather than something in the European spirit or with social systems that would prevent people from being entrepreneurs. It's just not the case, in my opinion.
So one of the things that is different here from the US is that government and the Commission, by extension, seeks to get more involved in entrepreneurship, I think. I mean, we shouldn't forget, of course, that government funding and government research in the US was what actually got the internet and Silicon Valley each started. So government money plays a role in the US economy as well. But the government tends to take a much more of tends to back off a lot more from business compared to, I mean, here in Europe, we've had EU funding for, I think it was Index Ventures raised a fund with EU funding, or it may have been Notion Capital, but some of the funding that's actually been set up for tech startups in Europe has actually got EU backing behind it, and so government seems to get more involved in pump priming. I mean, is that something that's useful? Is that an advantage for Europeans? Marco?
I think it's very good that we have this global awakening in Europe, that we have to come up with more venture money for startups, because that's where everything is started or starts. But I think it's not only about the money being proposed by European Investment Fund or being put into VCs. It's about the whole, as Matthieu says, it's about the whole mindset of the investment community, which has to take on the fact that, well, startups are risky and some of them are successful and some of them are not, and they have to split their risk and they have to start to do that. And that is really something which is not happening in Europe, and I think it's a shame, because there are a huge amount of good ideas out there here in Europe, not only in the US, but they are not funded because we are not accepting the fact, or the VC community is not accepting the fact of failure, because you have 10 investments and you have 2 high flyers, you have 3 which are working well and 5 will fail. That's something you have to accept if you go down that road. So fortunately there are no VCs here in the room, otherwise they will just kill me now. But at the end, that's what I feel when I discuss with VCs, and I discuss very much with VCs, is that they always think they are not accepting the fact that this could be a failure. And that's the biggest challenge.
Antonio?
Yes, when I look at the VCs, well, I have a different opinion than I had 18 years ago. Well, actually, it's the same opinion. But 18 years ago, I believed that VCs didn't exist. And now I know that VCs exist, but, well, at least in Europe, they will only support projects that have proved themselves already and just need the money to expand more aggressively. And what we lack is the startup seed capital in Europe mainly, where you really take the risk of something not doing well. And for example, in my new company, Lunacloud, I don't have the need for this startup money, but I would say that 90% of the startups would need money to start a good idea. I know that when I reach a point in which I have proved my business model, I will have all the money in the world from VCs to expand globally. But I believe the biggest problem is the initial 2-3 years capital.
Filip, I know that some of the startups you work with in Slovenia do benefit from or work with research projects, so benefit from some public sector funding in that sense. I mean, is it helpful that the public sector gets involved?
Yes, obviously. But if I can add just a 5-second thing to the question that we had before. I think that's very much true. For instance, Dave McClure, one of the most prolific venture capitalists, was in Zagreb a couple of weeks ago, and he was I actually pushed the question to him when I said that basically we have a ton of startup events, but nothing seems to be happening. And he said the exact same thing, right? So people aren't signing checks in Europe. But at the same time, the issue is more complex because what you see in the US right now, again, seed capital is diminishing. So VCs want to see traction and actual success before they give you money. But as far as the public sector is concerned, of course, it is great that it is involved. However, I think that the model at which it currently operates isn't the best one, because what happens right now is that you have researchers at universities who research whatever they want, which I think is a great idea. And you should let scientists and academia work on what they feel passionate about. But at the same time, all of that research then just sits in the laboratories. So as far as we're concerned, what we're working on is taking these technologies, these algorithms, and then turning them into products that consumers can actually use. I think that is what is missing. So it isn't so much that the public sector should be involved in the startup community, but that the public sector needs to understand that all of this fabulous research and knowledge that they produce is essentially useless until they package it up in something that ordinary people can actually use. And in that sense, I think that we need to establish, if nothing else, an incentive structure that is going to incentivize all those researchers to produce actual products out of their research and not just let it sit there. Either that means that they get equity in the companies that then spin off of this research, either that would be a more hardcore measure saying that you, if you're a technical researcher, need to produce a certain amount of products that hit the market in your lifetime the same way we require them to write academic articles. I'm not quite sure what the solution is, but something needs to happen at this point. But it shouldn't be the fact that we're going to have young startups and 20-somethings who have some kind of a grasp on technology, then meeting with professors who've been studying this for 15 years, looking at computer vision technology, not quite understanding the code, and trying to package it as a product. We need those researchers actually working on these products to make them into consumer goods.
Matthieu, do you want to add?
Yes, I mean, obviously having public funding is quite a chance for startups in Europe, and especially because the Commission is very active in funding. And actually, I come from France, and in France we have the habit of having even more public funding. So of course it's interesting, but I mean, honestly, I haven't built a company to get public funding. I mean, somehow my goal when I build a company is what drives me is rather to create employment and because I do business. So I'd rather not have public funding and have some business. And the fact is that it's extremely complex to get business typically with the Commission, or extremely complex to get business with the French government, for instance. I have an interesting story about that. I was actually in my company was consulted as a sole contractor for a project for the European Commission. So we are the only one bidding. And we stopped the bid because just building the answer was so damn complex, so time consuming, that it was not worth the effort. And that's a real issue. In Europe, we have a real chance of having very strong government. And I don't know if it's a chance or not. Everybody can have his opinion on that, but it's a fact that we have very strong government with a lot of money. This money can be used in two ways: in giving funding, or in developing business with, especially with smaller companies. Once you get funding, it's not really money that you've earned. It's not really money that you're gonna take care of every single euro to build another to employ one more person. It's not money that will give you references that will allow you afterwards to go outside of your borders and convince customers in other countries or in other continents. I'm a strong believer that we'd rather not give public funding, but isolate a chunk of the business that every single public institution in Europe want to do and reserve that for emerging companies, to drive the business, to give references. I think it's much more important. Again, I mean, funding is good, but it's highly complex. I mean, I participate in a FP7 project. Gosh, I mean, that's a nightmare. I mean, I'll be fully open. You are even advised by European project officer not to make the true reporting of your activities, because if for any reason your monthly reporting or your quarterly reporting gets out of the track that was defined 2 years ago, then everybody is in a big trouble to justify that. But we all know that projects, especially in IT, never follow the track. So it's kind of crazy. I actually recently I backed off another European project because of that. I think that's a really important issue. There's a lot of money that is given over to for research, to research institutions, to startups, to SMBs, or to large companies. For what regards startups and SMBs, I think that it's really money lost. Not because this type of companies don't need money, it's because they don't need money in the way of public funding. They need money in the way of business, being able to access and to make offers to public government and to public institutions.
Matthieu, I hope you'll be able to stay for tomorrow's session on the public sector and cloud and the European strategy on encouraging cloud computing, especially to supply the public sector, because you obviously have some useful experiences to throw into that debate. We should break very shortly, but I wanted to see if anyone has any questions to pose. We have one question there. Is anyone around with a microphone? We have two questions. And I have a microphone here. So I need to ask you to keep your answers brief so that we don't overrun too much into the break.
Hi, I loved your question, if there's any VC in the room, but can I just have a quick question to your four? How many cloud services do you use? Raise your hand if you use more than 5. How many more than 10? Okay, so between 5 and 10. How many of those are cloud services of small European SMEs? More than 0? Raise your hand, please. More than 1? More than 3? Wait, you're probably using Dropbox, you're probably using at least 5 Americans. So, but I believe the point is, I think we are all using, and we are only trusting, I think, in majority, American, large, almost blue chip cloud services. So we should also start using small European SME services. I'm sorry, that was not a question, sorry.
That's a very good point.
It's still a useful contribution to the debate.
One of the things that we need to get better at in Europe in general is marketing.
I would like to introduce myself. I am Anna Nietyksza, entrepreneur managing small seed capital fund in Poland. Also a member of European Economic and Social Committee, preparing an opinion and with my colleagues about the EU strategy on cloud. And also authorized advisor on the Warsaw Stock Exchange. So this is a comment about what you have been, mentioning all. Well, yes, this is all about risk. Of course, we can invest, and we are investing. I am investing in startups, but the point is that we have seen also, and I have invested in startups, and it was a disaster. So, it's 8 of 10. It's failing. So this is about statistics, though. So the point is, you have really to be very careful when evaluating risk, and you are never sure. However, I strongly support the idea to investing in startups, early stage companies, and including public support for that. And one of the issues is first strong, let's say. Strong support of the European Commission for easy startups, seed capital funds, which could be created, and this is not a problem. Not only big VC, you know, there is a regulation now on VC, new idea of European venture capital funds, which will be a new brand name to allow investments for investor out of Europe, and these funds are obliged to invest to 70% of their money in equity of small and medium-sized companies. So that could be an issue, however, it's another regulation. So just what I can also say, I invite you to the Warsaw Stock Exchange small cap market created only for small companies. We have already 400 companies there, quite successful, and they are just private offerings for individuals, small emissions of actions, and you can. It's regulated, so it's wow. You have measure your risk and try. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. And so, yes, I know one or two people on the panel want to come back. Just quick answers.
Just 1 second.
Marco, to start
just
with.
1 second. So my CFO is from Polish origin, so I will come back to your idea. But on the other side, it's not only about a seed investment. It's also when your business model is proven, your execution is proven, your team is proven, everything is proven. Still, you have another discussion with European VCs than you have it with US VCs. So we're not only in the startup challenge, and where the risk for sure is 8 out of 10 are failing. But it's really on the whole food chain.
Yeah, I agree. There's one thing though that I would like to ask. When I spoke to Dave and some other people from the States when I visited Silicon Valley, they often told me that I'm a pessimist, which I don't necessarily agree with. But there is something that we need to acknowledge. The ideology that we function under in Europe is very, very much different than the one they function on in the States. While the statistics of startup success and failure rates are pretty much the same. So we've got about 90% of startups failing and about 10% that need to then yield 10 times the amount of the investment that was in. However, the difference is that when you talk to entrepreneurs in Europe, none of them seem to have the passion and the drive and the belief that they can actually do something great. And I think that as long, and please don't take this wrong, I think that this event is a brilliant idea and more of this type of things can happen, should happen. But as long as we keep sitting at events like this, dressed in suits and congratulating ourselves without actually stepping in contact with the young people, with the young startups, making them change their mind, making them believe that, yes, they will fail 90% of the time, but that they need to push forward after their initial failure, and that only then we will see huge successes, nothing will change. So even though we are discussing regulations here, and we are discussing the way the European policy should work, I think that we should never forget that there is an ideological role that each of you have to play, which is in making people believe, making people at the end of the day even falsely believe that they can achieve something as big as Facebook, because only in that sense will we get the 10% that we need in order to make the startup community grow in Europe.
Final comment from Matthieu.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with you, Filip. And I'd like to add, I mean, I don't want to be rude, madam, but I think that when speaking about startups in Europe, you start by saying, oh, you know, there is huge risk. You are completely missing the point. I mean, we all know there is huge risk. I mean, I think that for all of us, we invested all our family money into our companies. So don't come and tell me there is huge risk. I mean, I don't care about it. I took it. And it's the case for all of us. The point is not there. The point is that when we are speaking about risk and, oh, how can we avoid risk and blah, 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 in the same time, you have companies in the US that are building tomorrow's Facebook, that are building tomorrow's Twitter, that are all these companies that we don't have here. There is I mean, the IT environment is probably the biggest industry or the most important industry in the economy right now. There are very few players in Europe. That is the real risk. All of the rest, in my opinion, is completely missing the point. Of course, when you will invest in 20 startups, 18 will fail. Yes, that's life, that's the same everywhere. The question is not there. The question is how successful will be the 2 that remain.